Hi, this is Adam Feinberg, and today we're listening to Harlem Stories podcast.
And I'm Mark Becker, joining Adam. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Mark. Your input is always appreciated and adds a little bit of fun and spice to the episode.
Thanks.
So today, what's on topic, we're going to talk about Alexander Hamilton's home, the Grange. And, obviously Alexander Hamilton has been a founding father that has been discussed a lot in the last recent years. And we can wind up thanking the Broadway production of Hamilton for that. In fact, I noticed as soon as the Broadway production went live, because I live not too far from Alexander Hamilton's home, I can tell you all of a sudden we started seeing tour buses where there were none previously. Mm-hmm. So, it kind of changed the dynamic, and you wanted to thank you, Lynn, for writing that story, and as well as Up at the Heights. Brings a lot of more attention to these upper neighborhoods of Manhattan. Just a little housekeeping. Just want to reference that, we are now issuing episodes bi-weekly. We want to give you great content and, continue on with, offering you quality rather than necessarily just quantity. So today, Alexander Hamilton, the Grange. Who was Alexander? He was a soldier. He was a lawyer. He was a scholar. He was an economist. He was a congressman. He was actually the first secretary of the Treasury. I guess you can call him a jack of all trades.
That's right.
Or maybe more appropriate, a Renaissance man.
This guy didn't spend a lot of time on the couch.
No, I don't think so. He was involved in so many different areas. Entire books have been written about him. So we want to discuss points and people as it relates to New York. Our time is short, so we don't want to cover every aspect of history tied to Alexander Hamilton, of course. But we at least want to just give you a very quick, overview. He was raised in the West Indies and then later studied at King's College, which is now known as Columbia University. He never actually completed his course of studies and left school to fight in the American Revolutionary War. In 1777, Hamilton was invited to join General George Washington's staff as an aide with the rank of lieutenant colonel. The two men had a complimentary relationship, and Hamilton understood Washington intuitively, and Washington trusted him. So they really had a great relationship, between them, which really starts explaining, I guess, ultimately how the two of them are among the founding fathers. Hamilton served in some iconic events, including the crossing of the Delaware River, Valley Forge, the Siege of Yorktown, and numerous other battles. So, he kept busy. He, as you said, he did not stay on the couch. It was within his role that he experienced shortages of clothing, shoes, horses, meat, flour, gunpowder, and so much more. And Hamilton identified the need for central government over the states, a strong executive and national army. So, it was some of these experiences, and hardships that I think really helped give him a kind of a balanced nature and viewpoint on governing ultimately. In 1784, he helped found the Bank of New York, which still exists. Now, it's now merged with Mellon, BNY Mellon, and the former headquarters of Bank of New York has now recently been turned into condos. One Wall Street. Beautiful building. Beautiful building.
Maybe if you break into the walls, you can find some money.
That would be nice, but maybe the construction guys got to it first. So, slightly off topic, but yeah, I think it's definitely worth a look if you're interested in the condo market downtown, but really interesting. In 1787, as a member of Congress, Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, and we've talked about John Jay in other episodes, wrote a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers. And we talked about the role that John Jay had in the Morris Jumel Mansion, the Haunted Mansion story, which is now known as the Morris Jumel Mansion. So ultimately, Alexander Hamilton decided that he wanted to own a property instead of rent, and he wound up building the Grange, or now known as the Hamilton Grange National Memorial, and it was his country home. So that was a thing back then. They'd all live downtown and have these country homes, and I know that that kind of trend actually continued into the mid to late 1800s. I think it was around the 1880s that things started changing, and the private homes started getting knocked down and built for apartment houses. I think that was more the trend at those periods. But going back, the Grange, it was in 1801. Alexander Hamilton commissioned this federal-style two-story home, and it was a 32-acre estate in Upper Manhattan. We now call that estate plus additional land Hamilton Heights today, and includes also the sub-neighborhood of Sugar Hill, which we'll also discuss in additional episodes. He had visited the nearby Mount Morris mansion, now known as the Morris Jamel Mansion, a number of years earlier, and we had discussed that in the Morris Jamel Mansion as well, when he was attending dinner with newly elected George Washington. They were good friends, along with other multiple founding fathers that were in attendance. So, lots of great material here. Obviously, he got a chance to know the land a little bit. It now represents most of that neighborhood. And what's notable over here, currently Hamilton Heights borders 135th Street to 150th Street, 55th Street, south to north, and the Hudson River on the west side, St. Nicholas Avenue, south of 145th, or Edgecombe Avenue, north of 145th. And some people will argue that eastern border a bit, but it gives you a sense of what the borders of Hamilton Heights are today. Back to Hamilton's construction of this home. He finally completed it in 1802 and named it the Grange after his father's ancestral home in Scotland. So, he was raised in the West Indies. His father, was from Scotland, but ultimately, we wound up making his mark here in America. The home was in a wooded area and was watered by two streams.
Wow.
And I can tell you today, the area where his home originally would have sat, and it's been moved a couple times, and we'll talk more about that as well. But there is an underground stream there today, and what you'll notice is if you go into the townhouses or apartment buildings that are in that area over there, there's no subcellars over there because of that underground stream.
Wow.
I actually took a buyer to one of those houses that would have been one block north of where his house was. And, I'm telling this to my clients and they're blown away, but so was the listing broker. So not knowing that there was an underground stream in that area.
So if you tried to build a basement, you'd run into water.
Yeah. So some of these homes do have especially the townhouses, they have a basement, which in townhouse we wound up calling the garden level. But I did notice a little bit of water damage in that home that had there. So it wasn't anything significant, but yeah, depending on where the stream is, and I guess peak runoff times, and yeah, it is possible you might have a little bit of water flowing there. I know over at 302 Convent Avenue, which is an HDFC, they do have a sub-basement, a subcellar, and they actually, the water actually does stream in from over there. The water over the years have carved channels in the flooring, which they now, the co-op owners now call that the Grand Canyon. So they have their own little personal Grand Canyon in their cellar. Just a little food for thought, but a little off topic. So, ultimately, we do know that there's that underground stream. I don't know about the second stream, though. Alexander Hamilton was actually only able to enjoy the home for 2 years. On July 11th, 1804, Hamilton was killed in a duel with his personal and political rival, Vice President Aaron Burr. I think most people know that bit of history, associated with him. If they don't know anything else, that's probably the one fact they do know. And ironically, Eliza Jamel, a colorful character discussed in detail in a different episode, it was Hamilton's son, Alexander Hamilton Jr., that was her attorney to divorce from Aaron Burr after just 4 months of marriage.
Wow.
Crazy, crazy stuff. But Alexander Hamilton's wife, Elizabeth, continued using the home for 30 years after his death and eventually sold the home and moved to Washington, D.C.
So the guy who killed Alexander Hamilton,
right?
He went to divorce his wife, and Hamilton's son was her attorney?
Well, it was she that initiated the divorce, not him.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely, it was his nemesis's son that basically kind of stabbed the knife in almost in a way of speaking.
Talk about things going full circle.
Yeah, seriously. So the thing is, when you kill somebody, you have to kill their descendants too, right? Otherwise, you face a situation like this.
Yeah.
So, not that I advocate killing, but if you're gonna do it, you might as well be fully committed to the role.
Don't get us in trouble with the FBI.
Yeah, no, we definitely don't want that. So ultimately, in the years that followed, the land had several owners and was moved twice. And the original location of the home was located on the approximate vicinity of 143rd Street between Convent and Amsterdam Avenue, a little closer to Convent, though. The Grange at that point was in foreclosure and had been condemned for destruction in order to allow for the implementation of the Manhattan street grid. So this is something I didn't know until I actually started reading up and prepping for this episode. Ultimately, it was St. Luke's Episcopal Church that had moved from Greenwich Village to Uptown and had acquired the house. The church had the house moved approximately 2 blocks south and a half a block east to conform with the new Manhattan street grid pattern. And ultimately, the original porches and other features were removed in order to be able to move the house. The most recent move was back in 2008 from Convent Avenue near 141st Street to around the corner on 141st Street, relocated into St. Nicholas Park. Now, this makes a lot of sense when you know that it was the Parks Department that maintains the home and museum. So ultimately, it made sense to move the house into an actual park around the corner, and it just set a much more realistic tone for the way that the house would have originally been, surrounded by greenery. So I think that made a lot of sense when they wound up moving the house the second time, into the Parks Department. And there's actually videos that you can find on the internet that showed how they wound up lifting the house all the way up above the actual statue of Alexander Hamilton, along with a portion of the church. So it was pretty cool thing to see, but it was ultimately sandwiched in there. So it just kind of felt like, it just didn't belong. It just wedged in. But ultimately, to get the house out, it needed to be lifted 38 feet vertically in order to wind up rolling it out over the porch and out to the street. The porch being the porch of the St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And, today, from a real estate perspective, St. Luke's Church was recently on the market. It's been sold. Last I heard, it was slated to become a school because obviously, while the land itself, didn't contain anything on it, but, next to it, which was the land from the Grange, the church itself was all part of this whole landmark area, but it was in such disrepair. It was questionable what was going to end up happening. Well, the last that I had heard is they were planning on converting the church into a school, and potentially build on the vacant lot as well. So, I haven't heard anything recently on that plan, but it gives you an idea of what happened. But in order to get the house up, that 30 feet high, they had the house on wooden beams, steel I-beams, and layers of hydraulic jacks. So it was a real speculation to kind of seeing lifting the house took about a total of 20 days. But once they actually got it lifted to the appropriate height where it was going to clear that porch and the statue, it actually only took a few hours to roll the house past the porch. And then because of the incline where they were moving it, they were only moving it around the corner, literally around the corner. But at the same time, it was on this steep hill. So it took another 24 hours to lower the building back down, dollies affixed to it, and had the support structures. Once around the corner, it was going down that steep slope, and the dollies had hydraulics to compensate for that steep slope. So it was really fascinating to watch. You can go on the internet and find those videos. It's pretty cool to see. But the National Park Service has since restored the porches and other elements that were removed from the first move. So, this gives a little bit of background history on Hamilton Grange, on Alexander Hamilton himself, and some of the characters, which included founding fathers that were tied to the house.
Awesome.
Well, thanks again for another great episode of Harlem Stories.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.